Hey, Freight Pod listeners. Before we get started today, let's do a quick shout out to our sponsor, Rapido Solutions Group. Rapido connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently and deliver superior customer service. Rapido works with businesses from all sides of the logistics industry. This includes brokers, carriers, and logistics software companies. Rapido builds out teams with roles across customer and carrier sales and support, back office administration, and technology services. The team at Rapido knows logistics and people. It's what sets them apart. Rapido is driven by an inside knowledge of how to recruit, hire, and train within the industry, and a passion to build better solutions for success. The team is led by CEO Danny Frisco and COO Roberto Acaza, two guys I've worked with from my earliest days in the industry at KeHE. I have a long history with them and I trust them. I've even been a customer of theirs at Molo, and let me tell you, they made our business better. In the current market where everyone's trying to do more with less and save money, solutions like Rapido are a great place to start. To learn more, check them out at gorapido.com. That's gorapido.com. Welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver, and we are back with another panel. This one is maybe more exciting than the last. We had tariff talk recently, but today we are getting inside the minds of three of the best and brightest shippers in North America. I am joined today for this panel by Miss Nicole Schuman, the Transportation Procurement Manager at Fine Foods, Mr. Andrew Dafnos, Director of Supply Chain at KeHE Distributors, and Mr. Marco Vargas-Avila, Director of U.S. Logistics at Dole Packaged Foods. I appreciate all three of you for coming on the show today. I did solicit guests for this panel a few months ago, and it took us some time to get this thing where it is now, but here we are, and we are ready. So I appreciate all of you coming on. Why don't we start with some basic introductions before we get into the real nitty gritty of what goes on in your day to day. Nicole, start with you. Maybe just kind of your background, how you got into transportation, and we'll go with that.
Right. So first off, like best and brightest, I'd probably change mine to best and available. So thanks for trying to fluff that up. I got into transportation by accident. It seems like a lot of people do. I had been doing sales for different industries, and I ran into some people that were working for, KeHE. It really, like, transportation never been something that I really thought about as a career. And this one woman in particular, she, I'm like, so tell me what you do again. A few times she had to explain it to me, and she would tell me, and inside I was thinking, God, she is so bright and engaging and funny. What a waste of time to be calling on trucks, scheduling appointments, just like, and then, skipping ahead, I wound up coming to KeHE, and loved it. It's like something I had never thought of, like I said, and it was just exciting and challenging, and I learned something every day. And fast forward to coming to this side, Reesers was one of my customers, and I wasn't with KeHE anymore, but I'd heard one of my contacts at Reesers was retiring, and I reached out and, to congratulate him on his retirement. And we chatted, and he was, would you ever want my job? And I laughed, I was like, oh God, Tom, that sounds horrible, spreadsheets and all this. But long story short, I rethought it, and he connected me with his boss, who's now my boss. And I've been with Reesers for 4 years, and I'm really thankful and loving every moment of it, almost every moment of it.
Will you give us a quick high-level overview of Reesers?
Sure. So as I said, Reese's was my customer for years, and I had no idea the extent of where we are. Of course, like most people know of like the potato salad or the macaroni salad. We also have Don Ponchos, our tortilla and tortilla chips. We do co-packing. We do everything. I mean, we're everywhere. Like in all the deli cases, the mounds of potato salad, the Jello salad, the seafood salad, in restaurants, in fast food restaurants. We're everywhere. It was like I did a project with my daughter for middle school, and like a career fair thing, and I think it was like we manufacture the equivalent of potato products in a year as equal to Mount Everest. Like just it's like crazy. So yeah, we're only in North America, and we have plants across the United States.
And what would you say? This is maybe I don't know if it's a challenging question, but what would you say is the most unique characteristic about your business as pertains to transportation, in terms of something that might be a little different than, a normal over-the-road load? Or like identifying characteristic.
At the end of the day, it's, reefer freight. Transportation in particular. I mean, we have, Reese's is a 70-year-old company. And so we have, long-standing relationships with a lot of our carriers where, I can think of off the top of my head, a handful that are second generation that are hauling for us. One of the things that made me rethink my initial kickback of, would I want to work for Reese's was the people that we have at the company. Like I just, reflected on how amazing, like there's just so many great, not there isn't everywhere, but, great, hardworking people that really care. So, but I mean, everyone can, fast, fair, friendly service kind of stuff. Like, I don't know how I would qualify that question, I guess.
It's all good. I thought it was, I didn't mean it to be an odd question. I just was curious if there was some kind of identifying characteristic that if someone didn't know a ton about your business, that would kind of hone them in on. But refrigerated is a big part. And I think that's going to be a topic for today's conversation, given the three of you. But thank you. I appreciate you kind of getting us started there. Andrew, I'm gonna move to you now. Kind of just a quick high level background, how you got into the space, and what you're doing now at KeHE.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thanks for having me on, Andrew. It's definitely an honor. Like Nicole, I got into the space by accident. It was not the intention. I was an econ, economics and geography major at Indiana University. My intention was to go into finance after graduating. However, I graduated during the late 2000s, early 2010s financial crisis. So it was a little bit difficult to make my entry into that industry. So I was applying to various jobs in various industries, and one that really stood out was sales in a freight brokerage. And this is coming from someone who has never taken a supply chain class in college. So I knew very little about the industry when I first started. But looking back on it, it was a fantastic way to understand how logistics works from the carrier side and customer sides of the business. So I started out at mid-sized brokerage in Chicago, and I started off on the carrier side and learning on, how to book freight, track and trace, dealing with various issues, talking to drivers. That I did that from my first initial year. And then the second year, I shifted over to the account management side and understood what a shipper goes through, some of the challenges of, inefficiencies and ensuring that a particular shipment is set up for success. And from there, actually moved on to work for a managed services 3PL, where we manage inbound logistics on behalf of fast food brands. And I was actually there for 7 years managing the carrier development team until I moved to KeHE almost 4 years ago. So,
And how about a high level of KeHE and what you all do there?
yeah, absolutely. So KeHE Distributors is a leading natural, organic, specialty, fresh food distributor in North America. So we partner with retailers and brands to bring innovative, healthy, sustainable products to market. We're about over 6,800 employees right now, and we have a nationwide presence with 16 distribution centers across the U.S. and 3 more up in Canada.
Perfect. And the same weird question that I gave Nicole, if you were to kind of think about a unique identifying characteristic of the KeHE brand or as pertains to transportation, what kind of stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, just given the demographics of the suppliers that we deal with, we do ship a lot of LTL orders. So rather than using LTL providers across the network, we have a pretty robust consolidation network internally at KeHE to bring all those orders through the system and leveraging our KeHE fleet, which is about 600-700 trucks, and dispersing it throughout the network and not having to pay an LTL rate for each and every PO.
Interesting. Very cool. Thank you. All right, Marco, you're up.
Yeah, so moved to the U.S. in 2001. So kind of been an immigrant into the U.S. from Ecuador originally. So always looked at America and all of the opportunity here, right? Went to college, studied finance and econ, similar to Andrew. Had dreams of trying to make it into Wall Street, or specifically later figured out forex trading was kind of what I wanted to break into. But for whatever reason, at that time, around 2012 and 13, couldn't break into some of those brokerages, and similar to most of the folks on this call, freight found me through a recruiter at TQL, where I started originally as a broker in the Chicago office. Did that for about a year, then went to a trucking company that had a startup brokerage, grain transportation. They had a small brokerage at the time that was handling overflow business for the assets, so helped build out the pricing team, helped build out the logistics broker's operation, but ultimately wanted to learn a little bit more than just the domestic, and so an opportunity reached to go to Damco, which later became Maersk Logistics, which is an NVOCC, essentially a broker, but for the international side. So there I was targeting import logistics for small and medium-sized importers in the Midwest. So helping design the inland routes, but learning the ocean freight, the air freight, the customs brokerage, obviously drayage, and then helping them sell those services to those customers. And so spent time there doing some business development, later moved on to transportation procurement and warehousing procurement, and ultimately intermodal operations. And after having done the domestic and the international side, went to Kraft Heinz, got the opportunity to go work there in the Chicagoland area as a transportation productivity manager, focused on efficiency and savings. I equate that position to a continuous improvement manager, but just really looking at the large transportation network that Kraft Heinz had at the time. And with scale comes certain issues, and sometimes just doing the very basics and doing them well can yield to a lot of savings when you have a very large network like Kraft Heinz. So met a lot of really smart people, kind of leveled up my analytical kind of acumen there. And then the opportunity came around where Dole Packaged Foods, not Dole Fresh, not to be confused with Dole Fresh, there's 2 Doles in the US, but Dole Packaged Foods reached out to lead their logistics function. And ultimately, now I've rolled it up into managing the dry transportation, the frozen transportation, and the inbound transportation for Dole. So looking at everything for drayage, LTL, truckload, intermodal, and ultimately managing that piece of the business and building out that logistics capability to try to make it a competitive advantage for the shipper that I end up working for. So it's a little bit about myself.
Thank you. Each of you very diverse experience and background, and I think it's interesting that all three of you happen to have stumbled into and experienced time at brokers. I almost wonder if there's like a link between your willingness to come on here and having had that brokerage experience. All three of the people who volunteered were former brokers. But let me ask you this question, and this is for each of you. But having worked at a brokerage in the past, what was the most surprising thing that you learned coming over to the shipper side? That you maybe hadn't realized was true or hadn't realized while you were at a brokerage that, like, maybe if you had known, would have made you a better broker.
Can I take us first stab at this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because we get cold calls and I speak to brokers all the time. I think for me, making the jump to the shipper side was how often what we as brokers at the time deem as basic, right? The lingo, the vocabulary, some of the operations, how we take that for granted and just assume that the other side knows exactly how it actually moves from point A to point B, right? And the daily operational issues that you live and breathe in every day, that you just, in a sense, assume that the other side knows how it actually operates. And so I think that was the biggest eye-opener to me, that sometimes you're dealing with folks that just don't have that transportation operations background and come from a very different set, right? Planning or inventory or finance or whatever it may be, warehousing. And sometimes they're looking at transportation and the process of moving things from A to B from a completely different lens that sometimes allows the broker to really add value, right? To help them discover something that they may not have known in the past. And so that came across very, very often. Things that I took for granted to just assumed as basic that were really kind of eye-opening insight for certain folks that, if you were to ask that on the brokerage floor, it's just like, oh yeah, I learned that day one on training, right? So that's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways. Most folks that you speak with on the other side, if they didn't come from that operational background, sometimes don't really know. And you're assuming how it actually goes from A to B as opposed to knowing the exact process.
Nicole, how about you? Or Andrew, how about you?
Sure. I can just go if you want. All right.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that kind of surprised me from, moving from the brokerage side to the shipper side, you get a sense working with your shippers, and I was always like shipper focused, was the, I got a sense from this old school mentality of like, just, you're going to do it because you said, or, just like that forcing you to, do things or, move the freight at a certain price or, just like very like stuck, I guess. And then when I came to the shipper side, a shipper, or excuse me, a carrier and a broker, like an asset carrier and a broker, they're two different business models. And, like a truck is a truck, it's not the case. Like a carrier is a carrier. It's not the case. If you don't like meet the partner where they're at, like you're just setting yourself both up for failure. So that was like the biggest like eye opener for me. And then also coming from the brokerage side, where like if you have a last minute truck fall off and you're like working your butt off internally trying to get that recover, and it's like very tense, and you're calling in favors, you're doing all the thing, and then you want to like tell the shipper, you want a high five from your shipper, like, yeah, I did it. And the shippers are like, oh, good for you. Like, why am I wasting my time? You're like, well, where's my high five? I worked so hard for this. They're like, just do your job. And I was like, okay, all right. So, that was a hard transition or eye-opening transition, I guess, to realize that, you may be sweating your tail off behind the scenes, but, to the customer or the shipper, like, they don't want to know how the sausage is made, so I don't know.
They want the results.
And they don't even want to hear about the results. They just don't want to hear about the failures. So.
Interesting. That's a good anecdote, or a good point. Are you looking to grow your brokerage? Are you struggling to land new customers in these challenging market conditions? Look within. So many companies that tender you freight throughout the domestic United States also have business coming out of Mexico. A year ago, I understand why you might not have seen that freight as an opportunity. But today, Cargado exists. And that means any load coming into or out of Mexico is now an opportunity for you to support. In just over a year, I've been able to see Cargado go from ideation to launch to rapid growth. It's amazing to see how many logistics companies have been able to use Cargado to expand into Mexico to grow their business. Cargado is the first platform that connects logistics companies and trucking companies who are moving freight into and out of Mexico. If you move Mexico freight or are planning to, reach out to Cargado today at cargado.com. That's CARGADO.com. What about you, Andrew? You got anything over there?
Yeah. So I think, starting off on the brokerage side is extremely beneficial in my career, and I'm sure it is for the other two panelists as well, of really understanding, what really goes into every individual shipment that a shipper might not see. Talking to owner operators, understanding the challenges, understanding what a fuel advance is, and seeing how service and carrier selection really is on the brokerage side in various market cycles, and how to develop relationships with those smaller providers, and just understanding the general challenges that a brokerage would see, whereas someone that might be starting on the shipper side in their logistics career, they're a bit immune to seeing that sort of issue. And if something were to arise, or if there's trends of issues, they might not have the full understanding of what the brokerage is going through. But with my experience of understanding those challenges in different market cycles, you can speak to those amongst internally and with my team. But also you can understand and kind of vet through what sort of promises that a broker might make where it doesn't pass a sniff test. If we talk about RFPs and a broker is vastly below market than the other brokers that bid on a particular lane, if I didn't have that brokerage background, I might bite on that. But just to protect the business and less noise, I'm a little bit hesitant to take that rate unless if there's some sort of unique opportunity on the brokerage end that might justify that. So at the end of the day, it's very important for my career to understand that side of the business, so I can have that full understanding of the challenges that each side is going through.
Yeah, that makes sense 100%. I mean, I actually remember, and I think I've spoken about this on the show once a long time ago, but I had a very brief stint working basically for a distributor, managing their carrier group while I was sitting out my first non-compete. And it was very different. Once I was taking calls from brokers wanting business, and the sniff test wasn't easy. Like, someone promised me like they'd always respond within 10 minutes of any request at any time for anything. And I was just like, that's just not really, well, I guess in today's AI world, maybe that's a little more doable, but it certainly was not doable in 2018. And that was a classic example where like, it just didn't pass the sniff test. It's we're on to the next one. All right. Well, listen, I want to get into a kind of topic around kind of network design and strategy, and specifically, I guess where I'd start is, it's interesting when you come into your job for the first time and you're overseeing transportation. How do you think about disrupting the status quo with what you were kind of handed versus making your own impact and, designing your own relationships? Because, Nicole, as you said, there are carriers that are second generation now supporting the business. So I imagine you probably don't want to come in and really disrupt that in a nefarious way. But at the same time, you also are probably accountable for the results. And so there's probably a balance to strike there between making your own or taking autonomy and making your own decisions versus kind of leveraging what's been going on. Because it's not like you're building a network from scratch in any of your cases with your roles. You're more so probably fine tuning. So I am just curious. You've each been in your roles for different time periods, but as you got started and started to get your arms around your business, how did you think about, maintaining what you have versus building out your own kind of strategy?
Yeah. I mean, so when I came to Research, the market was much different. It was the flip of now, right? It was not so. And
how long ago was this?
It was 2021. So, like just stepping back, we had like just even looking at like the house cleaning, like looking at the routing guide and, grabbing rates from whatever carrier that came along, mostly brokers that like promised a low rate, wanted to get their foot in the door. They got shoved in a routing guide with, other brokers, and it was just like pulling the garbage out, making sure that the way that we were tendering the freight made sense. And so prioritizing our assets, our direct relationships, and then eliminating duplication of brokers in any routing guide or lane, and sometimes region. So we have, built inconsistency and then understanding that carrier has been hauling for us for 40 years, but their fleet is 40 trucks. They have a killer rate, and they do it for us, they haul up this lane twice or 3 times a week. I'm going to put them on top and I'm going to capture those trucks to make sure. And then, layer in these other trucks. And then just watching how, carriers stay consistent, those assets. Like we had a bigger carrier in our network, asset carrier, that was in virtually every single lane because they gave us low price, but they only took the freight when and where it was convenient for them, when the market was good. And, rooting out that, it's just a lot of house cleaning, but ultimately it comes down to making sure that you understand why a carrier wants the freight. Does it fit for them now or does it fit for them forever? Understanding their justification or their need for it. I don't carriers will be whatever you need, we'll do for you. And it's I don't want to hear, it's not about what I need. That's not consistent. That's not sustainable. What do you need? Do I have that? So I can put you in place and then not have to worry about it anymore. Because I know that you're motivated by your own need to do well there. So I think that's the biggest, biggest helpful, change that had to happen with our network.
How do you kind of do that at scale with a lot of carriers and a ton of lanes? How do you feel like you get your arms around that to a place where as you're looking at next year's bid, oh yeah, this lane from Oregon to Kansas City is Joe's Trucking, and they have another customer in Kansas City. They get meat down there. I know they'll be able to come back here versus this other lane. Once you're looking at the spreadsheet trying to do it, how do you remember all those conversations and all those needs? Is there a way to get that all in a place that's
I work with Good Ship. I have for a long time, and that was coming into when I started talking with Ryan, who's the original founder. That was the problem. The market was really tough, and how do you keep, because there are in transportation, there are a lot of handshake deals. Look, I'll give you this rate on this lane now, but I need you to over here take 7 a week of these Topeka to Chicagoland, and then you got to try to capture all that data, so yeah, I mean, that is a very, challenging aspect, especially with this, like Reese's, our volume, we have freight year round, certainly, but our volume can double or even quadruple depending on the region we're going to, depending on the season. And so just like acceptance parameters, minimum of 90%, it doesn't work for us because, we may have 10 loads a week on one lane during the winter, but now it's, 45 during the summer. How do you, it's a different story now with the market's soft, but I mean, because everyone takes what they can, but it's just time and communication and, Good Ship has been a huge help for us, especially I think, the majority of the carriers out there, they want to do a good job, and we're all stretched. There is, we're not the only customer. They've got a bazillion customers, but the fact that they can log on to their scorecard at any given time and see how they're doing, it makes it much easier. But, there's just no substitute for communication with your carriers.
Yeah, leveraging the right technology that gives your carriers a place to communicate back and forth with you and also track their performance and make sure they're doing what they should.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, clear expectations.
Clear expectations, always a winner.
Yeah, always.
All right, who wants to jump in here? Marco?
Sure. So we use Emerge, which I think having the first step of a good procurement tool helps. I think I've also seen Good Ship and very similar in that sense. It really helps make that process easier than skimming through thousands and thousands of rates, right? So there's other software out there too, right? But I think that's the first step. Secondarily, though, there is no other way but having those conversations, right, at some point in the middle of your procurement event or right before. But then are you going to remember that at the time where the decision really has to be made, whenever your rate, your final round is set and you're handing out awards. And so we've taken the approach that, right before the last round, whatever that is, second, third, fourth, whatever, how many rounds folks do, we want to have a conversation for some critical number of lanes with some very specific providers that we think are realistically going to be awarded. And in those conversations, I think, you hit it on the head there. Why do you want the freight? Why does this carrier or this broker want this lane is critical to understanding whether that rate is real or not, and then if they can execute on that level, on that rate, but at the level of service that is required. Because not everybody has to be 100% on-time delivery for every single lane. The vast majority of them do, but there are some that have flexibility. And I think in those conversations, you understand who really wants the freight or who thinks of it, oh, it must be nice to have, or who just shot a rate and got lucky and they're hoping to build a carrier base or put the assets behind them to service that lane. And so it's really understanding that intrinsic motivation to why you priced it the way you priced it. And if you are more competitive or well below market, which there are situations that exist that way, right? If you could really find the true backhaul, say for a dedicated fleet, that might be a rate where it's well below market, right? Those could be some of those situations, but you don't know that through the numbers. You need to have that conversation, and we look at it as kind of blending qualitative data with quantitative data, right? There are some things that you just can't put a number to, but if you know that they can handle this lane for 20 any week, but if you give them 50, they'll take all of it because they are moving 150 truckloads like a week in that lane, right? But how do you find that information, I think, is where you can find out through a bidding process in a procurement event, whether that is a real rate or a paper rate, right?
Anything to add, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with both Nicole and Marco. We had very similar mindsets of how to evaluate, our carrier base. It's all about, connecting them on a cadence, whether it's before an RFP, during an RFP, after an RFP, of understanding their network, understanding their power lanes, especially if it's an asset, understanding where their drivers are domiciled. Have they landed any new accounts lately that they need to feed freight into? Are there any surpluses or deficits in specific markets for that carrier? And then, brokerages, all this in a very similar mindset. All brokerages say, hey, we can do all 48 states. We have capacity everywhere, but every broker is different of, where they truly, thrive in terms of the carrier network. Every broker has a different carrier network or a different specialty, where, we try to ensure that, they're transparent on those specific lanes or markets or temperature types. Not that it will negate anything outside of it, but it will give us the ability to hone in on those specific strengths, because at the end of the day, as a shipper, you want to pair the right lane with the right carrier, of course, cost in mind, but that's how you're going to get the service, and that consistency, and manage through seasonality as well.
I would want to add one more thing that we've done that I feel has been very helpful for us, is that instead of like one bid season, we run 12 different bids from August through April. And it depends on, we have we've got a handful of shipping points in the Pacific Northwest. We've got 4 plants and a distribution center in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. And then we've got a couple plants in Halifax, North Carolina. And the seasonality of each of those origin points versus, where the destination is going, or where the destination is, affects the desirability of that freight. And so instead of trying to Pacific Northwest is an area where, 9 months out of the year, it's very easy to move freight, but that, fourth quarter, it, completely, upends. So instead of trying to either overpay the entire year to, cover our, our rear ends in the fourth quarter, we break up that bid. So we have a bid that, it is for the 9 months that, times are good. And then we have, a 3-month bid for the fourth quarter. We have a strong preference to the incumbents, and we'll put out a first round to get, those, like a wide net of market rates. And then we'll, have conversations with our carriers and find out, look at what they're charging now versus what they've taken through the year, and holding them accountable as staying consistent. So bidding when.
To add to your point, I think bid cycle really matters here, right? And how a shipper structures its bid before you decide to go live really takes a lot of thought and planning. And historically, it used to be you do a 1-year bid, it's around March, that's the bid season, right? And you put everything you have in that bid, right? But I think if COVID taught us anything, was that you need to plan ahead, and not everything falls through that regular contract business cycle where you could do it, once every 12 months. Whether you do it 6 months, 3 months, or a full year, thinking about the piece, the freight and the lanes that you're adding to that bid really matter. Because to Nicole's point, right, if you have a lot of seasonality, are you really trying to pay the peak price year round just to ensure you have that capacity? And kind of going back to your previous question of kind of changing the mindsets when you come in new versus established processes, this is a really big one, right? If the shipper that you're at isn't looking at transportation logistics as an area to be fixed or to be improved, but more so just to maintain and run it, perhaps the level of innovation or changes are not going to be as receptive as someone who recognizes hey, I have a problem and we need to bring in some fresh new ideas, right? Because, setting your bid up in an unstructured manner without understanding of your own seasonality and whether you should be doing 12 months, 6 months, or whatever that cycle is, speaks volumes on the shipper. So if the shipper doesn't know that, I think it's the sign for those other participants to say, okay, how much sophistication is in this procurement event versus others? Because if you've always done it like this and you haven't changed in 20 or even 5 years, there are some things that have changed in the marketplace in the last few years that you may be missing, or vendors that could potentially be great partners that you're completely omitting because if you only want to work with one broker or you're afraid of the word broker, right? You're really limiting a huge portion of the marketplace that could really help you out. Vice versa, if you're only going with assets and you think assets or dedicated fleets are the only way to go and you've never looked at a 3PL, it could lead to a shipper having to overpay for the specific service that you want because it's just easy and convenient, right? So it's having that balance and that kind of foresight before you go to market.
Yeah, and
that really helps out.
And to add to that as well, at KeHE, our network is constantly evolving almost daily. We deal with thousands of supplier partners. So you're a come and go, or we're converting freight from prepaid to collect. So, in between bid cycles, we do have some changes, but, we connect with our carrier partners and I'll give an asset-based example of, understanding their power lanes and what they need for the long term. Because when we have those opportunities on an ad hoc level, we can reach out to those providers and leverage our network. And that's the benefit of our network to leverage that extra capacity where they need some contract pricing and help their network out, help their customers out, help their network balancing out for the long term. Because at the end of the day, their primary objective is to keep their trucks moving, eliminate any deadhead or empty miles. So if we can contribute to their success, it's a win-win. And, and we're all coming together to create like a network efficiency improvement for both sides.
Attention freight brokers and 3PLs, Greenscreens.ai is transforming how freight professionals price and quote freight. With AI-powered pricing and real-time market intelligence, Greenscreens delivers accurate, reliable predictions to help stay competitive in a constantly shifting market. Whether managing spot rates or long-term contracts, Greenscreens empowers brokers to quote with confidence and boost profitability, removing the guesswork from freight pricing strategies. Trusted by over 220 brokerages, Greenscreens is leading the way in the future of freight pricing. And now there's Illuminate, Greenscreens' latest product designed to shine a light on deeper freight market insights. Illuminate provides unparalleled visibility into spot and contract freight trends, giving users a clearer view of pricing fluctuations and market conditions to inform smarter, more profitable decisions. Visit greenscreens.ai/thefreightpod and discover how Greenscreens and Illuminate can help win more business more profitably. I mean, great points from all three of you. I think dynamic is a word I keep thinking of in terms of, one I would want to describe if I was running a transportation network and designing my strategy. I would want like the word dynamic to be involved in all my teammates' heads of like, yes, we have a plan, and yes, we're going to execute that plan. But whether it's internal things like changes within the organization or changes within the company strategy of new products, or external things like tariffs or bird flu or COVID, whatever it is, like there's constantly a need to and opportunity to dynamically adapt to what's going on. And as Marco, as you kind of said, it's like if your transportation strategy is just set and that's like we're committed to this is who we are and how we behave, you're likely missing out on opportunities to do better. And that could be, through leveraging tech partners that can bring better visibility or better communication between you and your carriers, or it's just changes in the market that warrant an updated process. I think that like the old school 12-month bid works for a lot of people, and it can still work, but there are reasons to change. And if you've got a ton of refrigerated freight out of the Pacific Northwest, 9 months of the year it's gravy, but for 3 months it's a nightmare to move. And having the right relationships and the right kind of commitments is I think the best way to execute effectively there. One thing I'm curious about is how do you think about making changes in your org or making changes in your transportation network while also wanting to stay true to kind of relationships and commitments that you've made to your partners? Because in some cases, necessary changes for the business may come at the expense of a commitment you've made to someone already, and not wanting to get into this game of tit for tat where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to break my commitment to my carriers, and now they're going to feel like they can break their commitments to me in a few months because, I did it to them. You know what I'm talking about? How you can kind of get into that. So I'm just curious how you all think about kind of implementing potential change, knowing that you've got a history with your carriers.
Yeah, I'll start this one off. I guess it really depends on the reasoning behind the change, right? Is there a business case of a network change, or a supplier moved locations, or there's some sort of change on that side where either the volume will drastically change or the commitment that we committed to the carrier isn't going to be fulfilled? We, in general speaking, we try to commit to our carrier contract pricing as much as we can control. And the reason for that is to ensure that, hey, we're taking care of our carrier partners during a shipper's market. We're showing our stripes of, hey, we're sticking to our pricing. We're not shopping it out. And that way, on the other side of the market flip, we're not the first one on the totem pole to be either asking for rate increase or the service is getting degraded, and they're committing their side of the bargain as well. But of course, just like with any shipper, there are things outside of your control where you have to adjust. Whether it's bringing a new provider in that's a niche provider for that particular lane, and if that potentially comes at an expense of another carrier, or that carrier lost the lane because of something that was out of our control, let's make sure that we're helping that provider, especially if it's a quality and trusted partner. Let's try to replace that freight with something else that is comparable, that is also a fit for their network.
I like that, what you mentioned there. I think the only thing I would add would be the transparency, and you kind of touched on it too, right? Like we take very seriously, these relationships that we have with these logistics service providers, and we try to set up situations that are good for the buyer, good for the seller, and ultimately good for society as a whole. And in that means, if the network changes and you have to pull business away from someone, letting them know why. Too often, it's just a short email saying you're removed from the lane, and the logistics broker or the asset-based trucking company doesn't know why, and explaining those situations, right? And whether you give them a heads up that this change is coming so that they can reposition their assets, or they don't get caught by surprise, right? We try to be very transparent in that sense, because not all shippers are very transparent when it comes to sharing all that information, the data, the reasoning, or even the drivers for some of these changes, right? And I've found, just having been in carrier sales and spoken with that driver or the broker or the asset, right? They want to know, because if sometimes the unknown can create situations where they're thinking the worst, when it was just simply, we are closing the warehouse and we're moving somewhere else, and there's nothing related to their service.
Right, absolutely. Like, it's a tough one, like, you don't want to take away, things change that are beyond your control. Communication is a huge, is a key to that relationship. And then also, like, okay, putting your money where your mouth is and being like, okay, this is going away. I know that this is affecting you this way. Like, what else can we do with those trucks or your network? Like, what else can I offer you to make up for that? And I don't know. I think I can't think of one time where it's just been like, well, that just sucks, and that's how it is. Like, there's always something that you can do. Almost always, like.
Yeah, very good. Let's take a zoom out for a sec, just to how you generally think about carrier procurement. So as you approach, maybe it's approaching a large bid you're doing, or just in an annual cleaning up of your network. How do you think about, like, and feel free to be as specific, or you can be more general in how you answer this, depending on what you're comfortable sharing. But when you think about designing your network, how do you think about your carrier procurement strategy? How do you think about kind of the number of carriers versus brokers, the tools you want to use, how you even want to go about evaluating them? Like, is it an ongoing basis of you just take emails as they come in or calls and you think about it, or it's you put all the emails in a specific folder and once a year you open them up and you go through them? I'm just, I'd love to get inside your heads and give our audience kind of an idea of what this looks like from your side.
Yeah. So, from our standpoint, similar to Nicole, we actually are with Good Ship as well. So we leverage the carrier scorecard piece of monitoring service in pretty much real time. So it enables us to be a little bit more proactive and identify trends and addressing issues where, hey, this is a transportation issue. We got to address it with the carrier. But we also leverage that data for our procurement events to understand, hey, do we need to torque their volume down due to service issues? Do we need to torque it up because they were exceptional in their service levels? Or do we need to just remove them from the network entirely, whether it's because of service or, maybe they were teetering on the edge of unsatisfactory and there's already a redundancy with that particular provider. In terms of the procurement events, kind of dating back to what I mentioned earlier is having those conversations with our providers throughout the year. It's not just right before an RFP event of understanding, all right, we got to make sure that we're pairing up the right lanes with the right carriers. Don't have, and it's very similar to what Nicole said earlier, don't have forcing a carrier to adapt to your network. How can we work together so we enhance our network simultaneously in the effort for both cost and service?
Yeah, I think that with this group right here, our superpowers of, coming from the brokerage world and seeing both sides, and I tell my carriers this all the time, when I'm giving my spiel of I want to know what's important to you so I get the best price and service. If there's something I need and there's some, I don't have someone in my network that, fits that, I'll go find them. Whether it be, usually it's assets, right? Because there's, a million good brokers out there, but, I'll pick up the phone, I'll Google, there's a million different ways that you can find it. Topeka to Florida was a huge pain point for us when I first started, and I just started.
Can't imagine why.
I know, right?
Sounds like a great thing. You're telling me there's not an abundance of carriers in Topeka, Kansas, waiting to get down to Florida.
They love going to Florida, but
$350 a month.
Yeah, exactly. But you just start looking for carriers who have the motivation to go to Florida. Whether they're domiciled there, if that's, the old Coyote, backhaul method, and I think that a lot of people are, until you start cold calling, there's that, a lot of people are afraid to do it, and it's tough, it's hard, and, but you can't just wait for the right email to come into your inbox. So
yeah, Nicole, to your point, it's I think that's fantastic because you even dating back to my brokerage days, you understand which shippers don't ask those questions. If there's a specific opportunity, they just blast it out to their entire network and they'll just get the lowest price and on they go. Where I think all of us here understand our carrier networks and their strengths. So when we do have that opportunity, rather than blasting it out to the entire network, we'll just reach out to one or two or three that might be, a great fit because we know, given the information that it was given to us, we know that they will be successful on that freight and most likely will be cost competitive.
Yeah, to add to this, what we do on our side is we look at our service metrics, particularly on time delivery to the customer's requested arrival date. That's what we go by, right? we're trying to avoid fines from your Walmarts and your Krogers and all the other food service distributors out there. And if you don't have that data readily available down to the month, down to the year, or for however long they've been running volume for you, it makes it hard to then segment some folks out when you can just consistently tell through the numbers that they're not servicing your business as needed, right? So that makes it a regular recurring event where we're trying to remove the bottom 20 or 10%. We work with quite a lot of assets and brokers, upwards of 100 every year, and more get invited to the bid. But in terms of who actually sees the majority of an award or the largest award, some folks are better off on spot auctions, right? Because there's a portion of our business that just doesn't go under contract. And it's those daily auctions that we send out where some folks prefer to play in those areas. But the ones that do receive an award and then have an on-time delivery score that is below service and you've addressed it with them, and maybe their volumes, you notice, have decreased, and it gets to a point where is it even worth the administrative effort to manage that if they consistently fail, or there's a forever revolving door of folks managing your account who can never quite figure out the operational expectations, right? So we actively look to remove the bottom performance every year, but then also looking at those areas where we need a new blood or new participant or new assets, right? Because it might be a tough lane for us, or it might be a very remote area where we know that not a lot of players go into. For us, for example, frozen LTL. Not a lot of folks do those sort of things. There's FFE and there's H&M Bay and there's other ones around as well that brokers that can do it, right? But finding the right providers in those regional areas, I think goes a long way if you are actively always removing the bottom kind of 10% of non-performance and giving a chance to the new ones to come in, right? And for me, at least, it's typically cold emails that I say that I know like reference back to a future date when I'm going to have the new participants come in, and also having a kind of a continuous approach to bringing in new partners in the process for onboarding them and really vetting them to determine, hey, do you have network synergies or assets in areas where we need help in, right? And so that's how we approach it, is just remove the non-performance and consistently keep adding in areas of need. And so, to those brokers that are always either making phone calls or sending that cold email, you never know when you catch the shipper that needs help on that particular day, and you'll get a response on via email or LinkedIn or a text message or whatever it may be, right? I think there's striking the right balance there, but try not to be annoying because I'm sure we all get a lot of those. But you never know when a shipper might just pick up the phone or send you an email when they're in need of help. And so that's how we approach it.
Yeah, I want to jump into solicitations a little bit, and you gave me a good segue there. And my own 2 cents coming off your last comment, which I think is so true, is I've managed sales. I managed the sales org at Molo, and it's like all the sales leaders and the people all rolled up through me. And I was always interested because I'd go sit with the sales rep and ask them about their process and ask them about soliciting, and people felt like they knew the way or knew a way, and it would be like, well, shippers don't like when I do this, or they like when this and don't like when that. And I just think it's not smart to speak so generally or in so much of an absolute, because let's say someone thinks that a short email that's directly to the point and states exactly what the value add is with a little bit of flair about the shipper's network is the way. And maybe it is the way today when I email it to you, Nicole, because as Marco said, it just happens to be the day that you're looking for me to email you. But I might send it 17 different times to other people and it ain't going to work because it's not their day. And I think that that's just the truth of it, is that there's not like a way, there's not a right way to solicit. There are definitely things that are more likely not to work than to work, like maybe emailing someone every 3 hours until they respond, or emailing someone and saying, I'm going to email you every 3 hours until you respond. But I don't think it's wise for people to be committed to the idea that there is a way to solicit freight. I think that there are, my perspective historically that I would tell my sellers is try everything and do it in as respectfully persistent of a way as possible. You know, if last week you emailed someone on Monday morning thinking maybe they review their new emails while they're having coffee, if they didn't respond, try Tuesday afternoon this week. Try Thursday morning next week, and try Saturday afternoon the week after that. My point is just that, like, we shouldn't be so married to the idea that there's a right or wrong way to do something like solicit opportunities, and understand that there are some things with respect to your pitch that are just out of your control, in that, like, it's more a product of how the other side is willing and able to receive what you're offering as much as it is the quality of what you're offering. So that's my 2 cents. At MOLA, we built a great company, and I'm proud of the work we did. We knew when to ask for help, and sometimes that meant going outside of our own company. I'm proud we built an ecosystem of trusted partners like Metaphora. When we needed differentiated industry expertise in business consulting or technology services, we looked at Peter, Ryan, and the team at Metaphora. They've consistently delivered value in the transportation and logistics space for over a decade for mid-market and enterprise brokers, for shippers, carriers, private equity, and freight tech companies. At MOLA, we use Metaphora to solve problems we simply couldn't on our own. Metaphora is the only partner you should trust to help you win, whether that's doing ops and tech diligence, growing revenue, optimizing spend, or selecting and building software. Go check them out at metaphora.net. That's METAFORA.net. Now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I would love to hear, how do you like to be solicited? And, what are the do's and don'ts? And we'll start there.
I mean,
Yeah. Go ahead, Nicole. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, it's one thing to think about what the shipper needs, but also, like, when you're like that, try everything, like, do what feels right to you, like, be genuine. Like, that's one of the things that, if you're a broker and you're talking about my trucks, God, it makes me just like eye roll every single time I get an email. It's like, I'm, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And I'm, I've got trucks delivering to your facility every day. It's like, those aren't your trucks, dude. Like, don't pose as what you aren't, like, I don't know, getting right to the point. But on the flip side, I've had customers that, I'm a very, like, transparent. I put my foot in my mouth all the time. I'm very comfortable being me. When I was a broker, like this, always sticks in my mind. Like, there's a shipper that I call, leave a message for, like, every week. And after a year and a half of doing this, and I'm picking up the phone thinking I'm just going to leave another voice message, he actually picks up. And it caught me so off guard that it sputtered, and then there was this pause, and then he and I both started laughing hysterically. And, and then we had, we started working together almost immediately, and very, we were very transparent, very, we worked well together because we were, we knew that what we were getting from each other was sincere and accurate, and I didn't have to think twice about it. So
yeah,
be genuine.
So I don't want to come across as self-centered with my response, but just to kind of at this point in my career, we don't typically work with anyone that or anyone on my team or within KeHE have had a past relationship with in the past. So I'm not
that they haven't, or they have.
They have not. So okay. It's very difficult for us to onboard that that company. But I'm not referring to, like, the carriers themselves. It's more alluding to the salesperson representing the KeHE account, because he or she will have the knowledge on our complexities, understand the high service standards that we require, and also limits the learning curve considerably. And at the end of the day, it is a people industry. It's a relationship industry. So even if, I've had experience with a particular sales rep in my past life, in my past company, but I don't work with them today. I understand the standards that they have where I'm comfortable to bring them on board and not having to babysit or worry about them or, because I'm not, don't know them on a professional level. I don't have to worry about the unexpected surprises. Now, I do receive countless emails, phone calls, LinkedIn messages from various salespeople daily, right? So, I do shake my head when I see daily emails that were clearly copied and pasted, while failing to set themselves apart from thousands of other brokers that I get. It is truly a lazy way to get a customer to bite. I even had one salesperson, similar to Nicole, where, I left me a voicemail every day for a year with the same, scripted message, which would be something along the lines of, I'm looking for a way to get set up as a carrier for KeHE without selling their value. It's, I'm not really sure. Maybe it was to get their call count up and by leaving me a voice message every day, but it's not going to get me to pick up the phone or call back someone if you go down that route with the repetition.
Yeah, for myself, we're a little bit different in that sense. I think the complexity of the shipper's freight and the commodities that you move and the number of locations really matter, right? You're moving some hazmat into like a bonded facility that's a government building, like that's a different carrier than if it's just like a one pick, one drop of just 12 pallets of dry freight, right? But for us, since it's a bit more simpler in that sense, for me, if you have an elevator pitch that describes your company and what they do, and then why you want to work with us if you happen to catch me on the phone, I kept laughing at that example you gave, Nicole, because I've had that happen a lot for me where like, okay, this guy's called me like 6 months in a row. Let's pick up the phone and see what they say. And when you catch them unprepared, that speaks not just about them, but also the service that company may provide. Like if you're not prepared to speak about who your company is, what they do, the services they provide without having to think about it, what else does that say about the service you're going to provide when you pick up our freight, right? But having a good pitch, if you do happen to have someone pick up the phone, just goes a long way to be prepared. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be clean and direct to the point in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to emails, though, I talked about this on the Freight Caviar podcast, maybe like a year and a half ago with those guys, because they asked about this as well. And my advice to just anybody sending a cold email is use visualization and talk about your particular business and where you pick up from. What I said was show maybe a heat map that shows here's all the freight that we picked up in all the origin locations, because that says a lot more than giving me a list of like, here's where my trucks are. It's got like 40 different cities, right? If I know that I have a need in, say, Southern California, and I see that you have a huge, huge volumes picking up and delivering there, maybe that will give me a reason to send you a note. But at the same time, in the body of the email, right, just explain again what that elevator pitch would be. And again, you don't want to keep, put someone to sleep and write them like 4 paragraphs like a novel. That's just not going to get read, right? But think about you have a 30, maybe 15-second window for someone to skim through it, and if it catches their eye, then it likely will result in a response, whether it's in a LinkedIn message or an email. And I've had a lot of success with that with startup brokers that have mentioned the experience of where they came from and some of the similar customers that I would be delivering to or picking up from in that sense. And if I see some synergies there where you're picking up in these geographic locations that we're doing business in, and you're already familiar with, say, Walmart, that's hard to deliver to, or Kroger in that sense, then it's more likely that you'll get a shot as opposed to somebody brand new that's just kind of smiling and dialing for dollars in a sense and just making that same pitch every year, hoping to get lucky, which ironically, how I started at TQL, just picking up a list and calling all those folks and making that same message in that call and refining your pitch over time, right? So that I think goes a long way with most shippers. Just keep it short and to the point. And then if you do send an email, short and to the point, but then put something that tells us about what is it that you're offering from a service level perspective and how much of it have you done, whether you're large or small. and likely it'll improve your chances of getting a response, I think.
Yeah, Marco, that's a great point. And not only that, it's also very important for whether you're an asset or a broker to proactively research the prospect that you're calling upon, right? Finding out DC locations, what type of freight is being moved, what we do in general. I mean, all that information is public knowledge if you go to our website. If you make that quick 5-minute research, it gives a little bit more value to that sales email, to the person that's receiving it on the other side. Now, if you're an asset, it's what really catches my eye is if they indicate a need and would like to, leverage KeHE to fill a void in their network. If they come to me with that is actionable solutions right off the bat, rather than creating this blanket, hey, we can help you out with anything. But I think what's super important, especially on the brokerage side, especially in this day and age when it's not all about picking up freight from point A to point B and saying, well, we will never reject tenders. We have competitive pricing. Our service levels are exceptional. That's really not going to wow me, because who knows if that's factual. But if you're providing any unique offerings that differentiate yourself from your other competitors, that could help us fill a need, and then that would be something that's eye opening, and that could be anywhere from technologies or to unique programs that you've built through managed services, et cetera, et cetera. Something that would, say, hey, I am different from XYZ broker.
Yeah, it's hard to differentiate yourself as a broker, and then, 20 plus years of sales experience with sales managers, just like in my head is like, don't cut the conversation short by telling them, specifics, like listen to the customer first and then tailor. And, in today's age, like with so many emails and so many calls, you just have to, you do have to tailor. You have to look for the right prospect, and you have to be upfront with what you are good at. Whether the heat map, as far as visualization, that is very helpful. Because if I see an email that comes in that's 4 paragraphs, delete. I don't have time for that. So it may not be something I need now, but keep at it. If this is your strength, you dominate the Southeast, or, you have an ungodly amount of freight that, goes from here to there, and you really, your company really can, provide competitive prices, lead with your strengths. Even if it's not a strength that everyone needs, just keep on, move on. So I don't know.
To touch on consistency, I think, we'll stick with emails, right? But it applies to phone calls too. If I see that you've emailed me 5 times before, and I just happen to catch this one, right? And I see that your emails aren't just copied and pasted, but you've tried to slowly evolve it, just try to keep it conversational, but you're progressively adding more details to say the email you're sending, but because you're finding out more about that shipper, it does show a lot of resilience and consistency from that salesperson or woman, because it speaks very highly in terms of, well, they're consistent. So if things go wrong, they're not just going to drop you right away. Or that inevitable example of you have a fallout on a Friday and it's already afternoon. Are they the type of broker that will recover it for you because they're trying to provide that level of service? Or is it someone that sorry, it's 3:00, I got to go, I got to leave for the day. So this is a Monday problem, right? We're looking for those examples that showcase the level of service that we could potentially get if we were to give you freight, right? And so all of these things, at the end of the day, position the broker as a partner, and specifically on the level of service that a shipper can expect, whether you realize it or not. You're being judged in that sense.
I think that's a great point. And I say it because, well, one, I've heard it before from coaches I've had, managers I've had around, like, you don't realize it, but you might be being tested from your first email. And someone told me, like, there are people out there who commit to the idea that they aren't going to respond to you for 3 months. But if you're still there in their inbox after 3 months, they'll consider it. And I do like that notion of kind of what you see is what you're going to get. And it might be what you see in how they approach their emails to you. And this is one of the things I was worried about for myself, because I was so disorganized as a seller. I could never keep track of a consistent plan of I'm going to email them on Monday and the next week on Tuesday and make sure it's once a week. And so sometimes I'd email and then I'd forget about them for 2 weeks and then I'd show back up an email. My thought was, like, this wouldn't, my freight still picked up and delivered on time. And that was part of having a good team and having operations folks that were much better on the stuff that you weren't good at. But I completely can see how you might miss opportunities, because there were definitely shippers who I reached out to for the first time, and I put a lot of energy and effort. I did all the research ahead of time. I tailored my approach, and I sent them an email that I thought was a good email, and they didn't respond. And then I'd forget about them for 3 months, and 3 months later I'd come back and try again, and then 6 months later, and just like those ones typically didn't work out for me. So I just think you guys are all giving great. There's a lot of gold in these answers. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents.
I think, it's worth pushing the question upstream then. Like, there are a lot of sales reps, I would probably argue majority of sales reps, that, like, you have a finite amount of time to get a response or to move the conversation forward or blah, 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 before you have to drop the account for, some other rep to try. A lot of what we're saying is timing. You have to be consistent. You have to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about for the business. And it feels like, there certainly is, if you're getting feedback from if you're engaging with the prospect and you're just not able to move the needle, okay, at some point you need to move forward. But, some of these reps, I think, especially in a time right now where, that question of, like, what do you need? It's like, a shipper doesn't have a need, if there is a gaping hole in your network, there's something wrong with that shipper. These, I want to call them kids now, but these reps that are like, you've got 6 months to move forward. And it's like, is that really enough time? And then you're losing all this progress. And then the new rep coming in has to relearn, what these shipper, I don't know. Andrew, this is a question for you. Like, how do you
let me jump in here, because this was a point of debate in at Molo, and it was a point of debate I remember at KeHE. And what we're talking about is, as you now design your sales org as a broker, you have to have rules of engagement, or rules of the hunt, I remember is what we called them way back at KeHE. And these rules were designed in a way so that there was kind of a fair playing field for the salespeople. In some cases, you had 20 sales rep. Others, you had 500. And, these rules could be as related to the size of a shipper that you can pursue and wanting to make sure that a rep had a certain amount of experience in order to pursue that large of a customer. So it might say, in your first year, or until you've proven you can do X amount of revenue, you can only pursue companies up to 100 million in annual revenue, or it might be a different metric that they're measured against. And then after, 2+ years, you can pursue up to 500 million, things like that. But what specifically Nicole's talking about is what you might call a forward progress rule, which would say, once you have an account in your name that you're allowed to pursue, you have X amount of time, call it maybe 6 months, during which you have to move the account forward. And if at that time you haven't, you have to let someone else try. And this is where it's really interesting, because, it's not black and white. It's never black and white. I know there are some companies that don't even allow someone to own an account until they've gotten progress. And that's where you have situations where you might have 7 different
Yeah.
people from the same company calling a shipper. And let me just say, I can speak for everybody when I say that's a bad way
It's
to
a
run
bad
your
look.
business.
It's a real bad look.
You should never have multiple people calling the same account unless it's like a rep plus an executive who are tag teaming and
They're working
both
together.
aligned and they're working together. That I understand. But multiple people pursuing the same thing to try to get there first will never work out for you.
Right.
Where we struggled with this was you want to be fair to both the playing field of sales reps and make sure that people aren't just holding onto accounts forever without actually putting in the effort to move forward. But at the same time, where I think a lot of people make mistakes is having a hard cut rule where if you don't get it by 6 months, it goes to someone else. Because I do think there are a lot of instances where a relationship is starting to develop over 6 months, and by around the 6-month time frame is, you might not be ready to commit to me as a partner, but I'm on your bench, and you're thinking about me when the next guy screws up. And if I disappear and Joe Schmo jumps in and he's now selling, and there's definitely starting from scratch there. So my 2 cents in general to those listening, if you're someone who's designing a rules of the hunt strategy for your sales team as a brokerage, do your best to put the customer first and the customer experience first. And that's hard to do with black and white rules. So what we had at one point at KeHE, and I think I might have been part of, I don't want to take credit, so I'm not going to say that, but what we had at some point at KeHE, and then a little bit at Molo too, was kind of like a judge and jury, like a group of people that were kind of outside of the sales. They weren't involved. They weren't someone's manager, but they were sales involved. They weren't involved in the actual transaction or the actual issue. And you could contest a ruling, so to speak. So, if your 6 months was up, but you felt you were making progress, you could then put it to the judge and jury, and they would look at it and say, what's in the best interests of us in the business? Let's look at the engagement back and forth between you and the customer or the prospect. Does it look like we're getting close, even though we haven't fully met the requirements of forward progress? Because you might define forward progress as having received a bid. And Nicole, you and I might have spent the last 6 months, we've exchanged a few emails, we've had a phone call, but maybe you haven't even had a bid. This isn't great for your business because you explained to us that you have 12 bids throughout the year. But for someone else who doesn't have frequent bids, we might have just missed the mark on timing. And all of a sudden my time's up, but we are getting kind of close. And that's where I might go to the judge and jury and say, hey, look at this, look at all the context here. I am the right person for this account. It's just not time yet. Give me 3 more months, give me 6 more months. And then they could look at it and say, hey, this makes sense. Let's keep him on the account. But it's hard. It's hard from both sides because you do want to do what's best. I mean, my theory in running a service business is to design every rule in the business around what's best for the customer. Knowing who your customers are. And this is where we flirted with it being challenging for us in Molo, is because I thought that for us to have the best business possible, we had to try to treat our employees like they were a customer. And that, like, for us to make a really great product for our end customer, the shipper, and for the carrier, we had to make a great product for the employee. And you run into a little bit of a tug of war game when you're trying to design a rule in any instance where, in one side, it's what's best for the employee, and on the other side, it's what's best for the shipper. It's not always necessarily the same thing. And that's where it maybe is challenging. But I think when you have that philosophy, you end up with the best possible rules for your business, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of this pitches, I think, and the brokerages that I've dealt with don't always put that customer experience aspect like first and foremost, because ultimately that customer experience isn't just us 3 on this call getting pitched and getting emails, right? It's the people that are operating with your service and how is their experience with your company once you do break it in, right? Or you get a shot, right? Because I think that speaks more to the level of service you can expect that then allows a shipper to say, hey, do I want to grow this business together with them? Like, does the shipper actively reach out to like, where else could we be doing business together because we're happy with your performance in a particular area, right? First, you got to break in, right? And then you have to develop the relationship and get some sort of business. But for us, we have them prove themselves on auctions, like 50 auctions before you can get into a bid, so that we can have a real example of how your service is and isn't, right? And so, whether that sales rep that helped break in then carries on with kind of monitoring the level of service that the operations team is executing on, goes a long way, right? And it ultimately is part of that whole customer experience, right? That sometimes, who the actual customer is on the day-to-day basis kind of gets lost because we're so focused on the decision maker, right? And while the three of us here have progressed enough that we're able to make these decisions now, I think always keep in sight of the folks that are ultimately doing that frontline operation and the experience that they have, vice versa, plays into your ability to grow and also just break in, right? But just some thoughts there.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. And there was a moment where I noticed, that became apparently true to me when one of our customers in Molo called me and said that they had just finished going through their award process and that we were winning an award for, I don't remember what he called it, but in essence, he had taken a poll of all of his frontline employees, and there were like 10 people in the operations who in some way, shape, or form touched the freight. And, whether they were the ones tendering it, handling the appointments, handling the exceptions, handling the payments, whatever it was. But every year he had gave them a survey at the end of the year, and then they all filled it out. And that's part of, not the whole thing, but part of how they evaluated the quality of the carriers. And he was like, you guys were a top carrier for this in terms of feedback from the team. And I was like, it was the first time I ever thought about that in terms of like, that's a really important element of the whole thing, is that like these people who are actually touching the freight, like you have a chance to make a material impact on them with how you respond to them, how quickly you respond to them, how polite, respectful you are, things like that. So I just wanted to echo your point there, Marco. Anyone else on this stuff before we move to our kind of last topic?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would add is, regarding pitches, right, and sales pitches, and you kind of touched on this, Andrew, earlier, where it's very important of what you pitch, even that initial sales rep, what you pitch to a prospect, because that 6 months might be up and another sales rep might come in and try to win the business. But if you had a horrific pitch where it casts a lot of doubt on the organization itself, right? And, just because that rep is no longer there or no longer, touching the account, you still in the back of your mind, think, it's still that same brokerage. I don't want to do anything with them. So it's very important as a leader of a part of a brokerage to make sure that, if you're not going to land the account today, at least make a good representation of the company itself, right? So, I recently had a broker who I actually removed from the network at KeHE and at my last company as well. But he reaches out constantly to win KeHE back. But his pitch was, I'm a different sales rep, and the person you dealt with is no longer with the company. And little did he know that I dealt with multiple sales rep at his company in prior years. So I think it was more of a leadership issue. But the kicker was he talked about how they will take losses on their shipments now. And then followed up with attempting to guilt trip me that KeHE lost some thousands of dollars a few years ago on losers. I'm like, well, I don't know. That sounds very conflicting. So it's a poor reflection on the organization for future pitches, because if they're cultivating that kind of culture of how to approach a prospect, then I don't think any shipper would want to do business with them.
Yeah, get that 100%. All right, let's go ahead, Nicole. What do you got?
Add on to like the worst cold email that I got was from a broker that, I get it. You're trying to stand out, trying to be funny. And it was, he had clearly Googled, hungry child, image, and attached it into his email, like, I need to make money in order to feed my, my daughter, blah, 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 blah. And it is the one time that I literally, immediately Googled the company, forwarded on to the execs that I could get, find their emails. And I was like, never contact again. This is a real kid. Some of the, don't lose, God, just so losing touch with reality. You're so wrapped up in me, I want something. Yeah. It just can be horrible. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good note. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that. All right. I want to just for a couple minutes talk about kind of emerging trends, challenges you guys are navigating in today's market. We have seen this industry evolve, and it seems like a lot of the tech that I'm seeing is very focused on, for one, AI is the word that the word of the year at a minimum, maybe the word of the decade. Word or acronym, I guess, of the year. And so we're seeing a lot of technology come out with AI that applies to brokers and carriers. And now they've got the AI agents that make phone calls, and we've got the ones that are doing a lot of the workflows on behalf of these companies. I'm just curious, in each of your roles, what have you seen come into the market that has had any kind of impact to your business, or that you've maybe not even necessarily technology you've bought, but at least that you've looked at that you could see being impactful to your business in some way, shape, or form in today's market?
The one I saw actually just last week, we were meeting with several vendors on business reviews. And one of the pitches that I saw that was really impressive was, if your TMS has your data and you have all of your BI reporting and analytics, if you're able to create an agent that essentially creates these dashboards or these views, these charts and line graphs that can show you with a prompt, things like show me the average cost per shipment or per mile in this lane for the last 12 months and overlay it with volume, right? And then within seconds, it just spitting out this image, and then you're able to adjust it as needed to get you that analysis that ultimately you're trying to use in a presentation or put together for your period end reviews, whatever it may be. I hadn't seen that tied to a TMS up until very recently, and so that was very much eye-opening, right? Imagine if you actually have ChatGPT with your data being fed into it, whether it be your TMS, your ERP, your financial payments data, and then it's able to really create a lot of these analyses that might take a day or weeks to put together, right? And that's, I think, really powerful because it really levels up what the analytics teams can do for logistics. So that was one of the things that really was an eye-opener. Imagine having a ChatGPT agent tied right to your TMS or wherever all your TMS data is, right?
Marco, that's actually very relatable. So, this year we're going to be upgrading to the new version of our TMS platform. And within that, it has AI technology to help streamline or automate load planning, right? Something that we don't have right now. Still the same company, but just the new version of it. And it's important because, we're in this rapid growth here at KeHE, and rather than throwing bodies to scale, right, which of course is a requirement to a degree, but how can we leverage AI and technology to make load planning, to make data processing, data management a little bit more, a little bit more effective, to where, we don't need, to just staff up to do the same thing that a AI technology platform can do. We've been heavily investing in technology over the last, couple of years, and we're still going to be investing in technology. Another, platform that we did onboard a couple of years ago was a network optimization and blueprinting tool, something that we did not have in the past. And it helps us, achieve stronger utilization of trucks and decrease our per truck footprint across the network, and enables us to stop shipping air, right? Because again, we do a lot of LTL quantities and consolidation. And in order for that to work, the timing needs to work, purchasing needs to be read in, and to make sure that we're all aligned, to make sure that we're optimizing the trucks the best as we can. And then going back to, Nicole's on GoodShip as well, but we did onboard GoodShip this year, which offers a new set of technologies for us that will help us be a little bit more efficient with a new RFP procurement tool. Having carrier scorecarding a little bit more carrier facing rather than what we had in the past. It was a little bit more internally focused. And it will be able to help us even be more proactive with service issues and trends, and making those decisions before having someone else bring up an issue before it's too late.
Great. Anything you want to add, Nicole?
I mean, like,
That's fine.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're a little bit behind on the times for sure. I mean, we still do we do quarterly carrier meetings with all 70 plus of our carriers, and via Zoom, the communication goes back. GoodShip is great, but no, you really haven't seen much application of AI in our business. At least the transportation side. So,
yeah.
Another topic that I think has come up with the application of AI, but I think is on the scheduling side and doing some of these administrative pieces, and whether you can have, the shipping warehouse and the receiving warehouse talk to each other via AI around the schedule and what appointment should you schedule, right? And you can remove the emails or the phone calls, right? One of the pieces that as AI starts coming into operations, particularly in transportation and logistics, I think the participants should not lose sight of is what happens when it goes wrong. Because if you just become another ticket in a giant list of IT tickets, when you actually need something to be fixed urgently, right? I think that can really sour the shipper's perspective on your technology and your overall product if ultimately when the technology breaks or fails, who and how is there to fix it? And that same company that made that pitch that I mentioned at the beginning in terms of Chat GPT kind of tied to it that can provide these visualizations, right? If you become just a ticket within the giant list of other issues that they have to troubleshoot, and it's just you feel like you're going to a calling center that has no idea what your issue actually is, that can actually work to your detriment, right? And because technology is great, and it could really help bring a lot of efficiencies and optimizations out, right? But you still need people that can be there to ultimately make sure it's working as intended and step in a case-by-case exception, right? And so I think it has to be a balanced approach, right? Because there's never going to be just fully autonomous, maybe in our lifetimes, in terms of TMS or procurement events, right? There's still going to be decision makers and folks that have to look through that, right? But will we get help from AI? For sure, right? But when those things inevitably go wrong, when there's a bug or there's a glitch or whatever it may be, you still need to rely on those people to be able to help you troubleshoot those issues that may arise. And so whether it is, you scheduled all these things incorrectly and now you got to go back and redo them all, right? And how that gets communicated to the rest of the organization does go a long way. And so it has to be, I think, the right approach of technology and people to really be able to push, I think, AI to really be embraced, right? I think, transportation and logistics is an industry that is very kind of set in its ways, right? And so sometimes it's harder for our industry to kind of push itself forward like it perhaps should be in some other areas, right? But these are, I think, the events and the conversations that help push that towards the forefront, right? Like, how do all of us utilize this technology to the betterment of our group and organizations?
To summarize what you're saying, I heard something that really resonated, and it was AI is not going to replace your job, but someone who can utilize AI probably will. Like we just have to find that right, back to your point, the right balance of, how do we do, what we do just a little smarter, a little faster, more efficient.
Well said.
So, in the interest of time, I will make this next question our last one. It's hard to manage with a panel with three people to get the time right with all the questions you want to ask. But you guys had great answers all throughout today, so I'm glad. I appreciate you all. So, I guess what I'll ask now is, what is something that, as you look at the next couple years, what is either a problem, or it doesn't even have to be a problem, but what's a solution or a innovation that you'd like to see come into the space that would make your job easier or make your team more efficient or just make your business run better? Like, what's just something that's not there today that you just wish was, or you hope comes to fruition in the next few years?
One of the things I saw when I think it was at Manifest, and I just like, by seeing different companies speak together, like different panels, like I saw like a shift of competition, which everyone, loves to, chest pump and, like, oh, we're the best, we're going to be the best. But there seemed to be like a shift in like collaboration. And I think that if, all the information's out there if you look hard enough. Like everyone tries to, the look on your face, Andrew, says, where are you going here? Wrap it up here, lady.
No, you're good. You're good.
Well, I recognize I'm not being very concise. I think that what would make my people's position easier is if people that they work with were more transparent, and felt comfortable being more transparent. If the three shippers that are on the call right now and I like got together later and like, hey, let's look at our network and see if we can share some resources. Who's doing this lane for you? Can they do, where are you, if we work together a little more, because it's
collaboration.
It's not right now.
No, I love.
Oh, go ahead.
I love that answer. I was just going to say shipper collaboration is something I've always been super curious about, is if there's a way to get like a network of networks.
Right.
And, Les Aiken will probably, I'll be hearing from him after this, because he's all about this too. But I just think, and I don't think everyone can do it. And, it'd be interesting to see like a Coke and a Pepsi, overlap and work together. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But the right companies, and maybe it's vendors and retailers, distributors and vendors. There's opportunity, because it's point A to B and B back to A. The networks exist that could overlap and create a lot of efficiencies and make life easier for all the participants. It's just hard when everybody has their own kind of self-interest that they need to care for. But I do think it's possible. So I'm with you. And that's one that I hope
costs are increasingly crazy, and we can grind the bones of our carriers to get them to take freight that they really, are losing money at, or they just have to keep their trucks going. They're not. But if we can, find the efficiencies in our networks, then everyone wins.
Yeah.
So
I will add, and I'll admit to this as well. So I do some of that today with other shippers that I know that have a lot of the similar asset-based carriers that we do, just through meeting them at events or working at my past company and understanding their network. And there are a few shippers out there where correlates with the KeHE network very well in terms of, their ship points are our receiving points and vice versa, and while leveraging the same carrier. So we'll have candid conversations about, about certain lanes that are in their network that they're leveraging, some mutual provider where, I can now go and match that up with their network, because if my shipper buddy is successful with their service, I'm getting the service as well, and the carrier is happy because their trucks are continuously moving, and it's almost acting like a dedicated program. So, and I think I agree, there should be a lot more of that and a lot more transparency to make sure that all parties involved are successful, because at the end of the day, yeah, everyone wants to be profitable, but also everyone wants to be as efficient as possible with as minimal noise as possible as well. In terms of the future, yes, I hope there is a lot of that, and also finding out ways, and I think shippers, brokers, asset-based carriers can all agree on this, is to lessen the volatility of the market swings, whether that's going up and down. It's certainly going to be around, especially with, ever since the deregulation, but, it's something that needs to, how can we make the pain strike a little bit less for both sides of the table that you're sitting on, still expecting that there'll be swings, but not as vicious as we've seen over the last decade.
Yeah, to add to your point, both of your points actually, because Nicole, you gave me an idea here in terms of like my answer, but first, proactive collaboration with other fleets to find like those backhauls, I think goes a long way. I would love to see that in the next 10 years, where the idea that you're inviting not just assets and brokerages, but some of these strategic vendors that have dedicated fleets that need backhauls, for example, to be a participant in your bid as if they were a trucker. Just like you mentioned, we also work with some of our particular pallet vendors to find those synergies where, like, hey, you're delivering a load of pallets into my warehouse. Why don't you pick up something else out of it? And we could probably put you in the general area where you want to be. And if you're able to provide a competitive rate, which they typically are because they're sometimes going back empty, then those are those perfect win-win scenarios where you find that buzzword of network synergies, right? Those are the real examples. So would love for that to be a bigger staple in most shippers' bids, right? To kind of incentivize that collaboration. But the other one that really comes to mind also with collaboration, but more as like an industry collaboration is fighting freight fraud, right? Like in the last year and a half, the amount of fraud that I've noticed out of our Southern California warehouse has been rampant, and sometimes the methods in terms of stealing like fruit cups or juices, right? Which again, we're not talking high value items here. Is so creative where you're like, wow, I wonder what they could do if they applied that to something useful for the benefits of society, right? But specifically to the fraud point is like, I think the brokerage community has really done a good job recently in terms of trying to bandage or trying to find those bad actors, right? But it also impacts the shippers, right? And so finding some sort of entity in the marketplace that kind of helps create that transparency to ultimately accomplish the objective that everybody wants, which is I want to be able to trust the people that are calling on our freight, that are picking up our freight, so that all this theft and double brokering issues can be put to bed, so that you don't have this segment of organized crime impacting not just the brokers, but the shippers as well, right? Because nobody wants to deal with a cargo claim on the shipper side. I'd rather just deliver to the right location, right? But who is that right partner to create that collaboration and share that transparency to ultimately, not allow those bad actors to cause more problems for everyone involved, right? So freight fraud would be great to see as a much larger area of collaboration in the industry.
I agree.
Really great points all around. Yeah, I mean, from freight fraud, that's a serious issue that the industry is trying to tackle, and hopefully will continue to put maximum effort into to collaboration across shippers. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities sitting in front of us. And with that, I just want to thank all of you for coming on the show today. This is my first time trying to panel with shippers. I think you all did an incredible job, really helped educate our audience on how you like to run your business, the the things that you've learned in your time from both the brokerage and now shipper side. And, just really grateful for all of you for coming on. So with that, to our audience, that's all we got. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.